So welcome everybody to this City Nation Place webinar, which we're delighted to be hosting in partnership with Reputation Lab. I can see you're all joining, so it's great to have you with us today. And we thought this webinar was particularly timely as we're living in an era that's really defined by geopolitical uncertainty, global conflict, and also the rapid spread of misinformation. So a nation's reputation has never mattered more. Reputation Lab's RepCore Nations 2025 study reveals how countries are perceived on the world stage and what that means for tourism, for trade, for investment and influence, whether you're a nation or whether you're a prominent city within that nation. So I'm delighted that we have with us today Fernando Prado Abuín from Reputation Lab, and he will be sharing the results of this year's RepCore Nations study. And we also have, you can't see them in the room with us yet, but we do also have with us Sarah Volberg, who is the Executive Director for Global Growth Marketing and Brand Intelligence with Destination Canada, and Maria Lipiatska, who is the Head of Brand Ukraine and the Strategic Communications Advisor for the Ukraine Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So we're going to hear first from Fernando, and then after his presentation, I'll be asking Sarah and Maria to reflect on what they've heard and to talk about how they leverage this understanding of reputation in their own strategies. And all three of our speakers will be delighted to answer your questions. So please do put any questions that come to you in the Q&A box that you can see as we go through the discussions, and I'll endeavour to make sure that we include as many of those as we can in the time that we have available today. So let's not waste any more time. I'm delighted to hand over to Fernando. Welcome, Fernando. Over to you.
Hello, Claire. Well, good morning to everybody that follow us from the Americas. Good afternoon to those who follow us from Europe or Africa. And good evening or night, despite the time difference, who still follow us from Asia Pacific. Well, my name is Fernando Prado, and I am a partner at Reputation Lab, a company specialized in the measurement and management of corporate reputation. We are in Europe and in Latin America. Thank you very much for your time today. I would also like to thank Claire Dewhurst and City Nation Place for organizing the webinar, and of course, Maria Lipiatska and Sarah Volberg for agreeing to participate. It is a pleasure to be able to share with you the results of our latest reputation analysis. Well, this is the agenda we have for today. I'm going to try to speak in the next 20 minutes or so about basically the reputation economy. We'll start by explaining why a country's reputation matters and how it impacts economy and international relations. And we'll describe how reputation is measured using our RepCore Nations methodology, and well, to understand how each country is perceived. At this point, I will present some of the findings from our latest analysis, 2025. Well, effective management also requires understanding international audience expectations. So we will enter in the detail of what are the expectations of general population around the world. That is the point on this presentation. And we'll enter a little bit on the evidence of how countries' reputation generate tangible economic value. I'm going to talk a little bit about impact on tourist arrivals, foreign direct investment, etc. And finally, and to open the conversation with Sarah and Maria, I'll offer a few brief insights into the reputations of Canada and Ukraine. I think two compelling success stories that our guest speakers will expand on today. Finally, I will give just some takeaways of my presentation. First of all, I want to start by defining the concept we are going to talk about. What is reputation? Well, reputation is the set of feelings generated from perceptions, judgments, and evaluations of stakeholders about a company, an organization, or a country. At Reputation Lab, we normally work for companies, but we also do this analysis about the reputation of countries, and we use similar methodologies. I have underlined three words here: feelings, perceptions, and stakeholders. We are talking about feelings. Reputation is about sentiment. It's an emotional concept. A good reputation encompasses feelings of admiration, trust, and respect. That is what we are going to analyze about countries, the level of admiration, trust, and respect. That comes from perceptions. That's why we need to interview different people, because our reputation is not in our country, in our reality, it's in the minds of people that is around us. That's why I underline the third word, stakeholders. Well, why we are interested in analyzing a concept like reputation? Well, because reputation conditions the attitudes and behaviors of the different people, of those stakeholders towards a company or towards a country in this case. That is what we say we live in the reputation economy. A nation's reputation is built through basically 4 channels. First, by experience, whether we've visited the country, consumed its products, met people from the country. Then, in secondly, we have the country's own communication, perhaps tourist promotion, communication of the different companies that belong to that country or institutions, participation in international organizations, and so on. In the third place, we have what others say about us, about our country. Mainly news coverage, the news, but also word of mouth, share experience from others, etc. And finally, and this is something that it's very specific when we do the analysis about countries, we have the national stereotypes. Stereotypes that normally are widely held, and they reside in the imagery of in the common imagery. This may stem from past realities, and in many cases no longer reflect the present. Still, in the absence of the other 3 sources, they tend to fill the gap. Some countries' reputations are strongly shaped by this inherited perception. So we need to understand that this is the source of our perceptions. When we internalize those perceptions, we get those feelings, and that is the reputation. And that reputation has an influence in attitudes and behaviors, like willingness to visit a country, to buy products coming from that country, to study in that country, to hire someone that comes from that country. And finally, this has, sorry. And finally, I'm trying to dismiss, and finally that creates value. So this is how we explain why we say that we live in the reputation economy. Perceptions finally have an impact in value. How does this work in the case of countries? Well, that reputation, those perceptions, may influence in attitudes and behaviors, like the intention to visit, buy products, invest, and finally, we have data about tourist arrivals, exports, foreign direct investment. What we try to do with this kind of analysis is to analyze the levers for creating those behaviors and finally creating economic results. Well, until here, a little bit of the theory. So, why we think the reputation is important is because it has this economic value. So, if it is important, we need to be able to manage it. So, how do we manage reputations, both for corporations and for countries? Basically, what we need to do is to compare perceptions and reality. I use this chart from Professor Honrum, in which basically it's a simple way of explaining reputation management. In every single variable that has to do with or creates reputation, admiration, and trust, we can have a good perception or a bad perception, and we can have a good reality or a bad reality. What we do with our analysis is understanding the perception. Then when we compare with reality, we find communication opportunities if our perception is not good and our reality is better, and we find reputational risks when our reality is worse than our perception. That is what we need to do in order to manage reputation. But in order to be able to manage reputation, we need to have a measurement. We need to understand what is that perception. And for doing that, what we need is basically the correct metrics. That's why that leads me to arrive to the basic element of what we are going to talk about in the day of today. The metrics RepCore Nations. We have this reputation. RepCore Nations is the model that we use at Reputation Lab in order to understand a country reputation. A country reputation, as I was mentioning before, is an overall emotional indicator that we have with RepScore. The country reputation has to do with admiration, trust, and respect. So we use basically three levels, three kinds of variables that we use in order to explain a country reputation. We have the RepScore, that is the overall emotional reputation indicator. We have it measures sentiments, as I mentioned, as admiration, respect, good feeling, and trust towards the country. Then we explain that reputation score, that rep score, with different, in our case, 22 individual variables that have to do with different rational elements. We group those 22 variables or attributes into five dimensions. One is the institutional quality, the other one is quality of life, level of development, human factor, and ethics and responsibility. At the end, we have a third group of variables that we call supportive behaviors. That is how we explain the creation of value. Supportive behaviors are the intention to visit the country, to buy products from the country, to invest in the country, etc., to study in the country. In this model, as you can see here, those 22 attributes have to do with different, very specific elements. What we are going to do for the countries that we are going to measure is understand the perception in each of those elements in order to explain the emotional concept that is reputation. So, well, until here, let's say the way we explain reputation. So let's see what we have done this year. In 2025, we have, in order to create this study, we have been interviewing 61,000 people, more than 798 individual people, in order to understand their perceptions about countries. We have done these interviews in 38 countries between the months of March and April. So this is very recent information. We have analyzed the reputation of 74 countries, but in order to develop a ranking, we have taken the 60 countries with the largest GDP, and we have measured that the reputation of those 60 countries among the most industrialized markets, the G7 countries. So, well, over here in this map, you see in color all the countries where we have done fieldwork during these 2 months. So this is quite a very broad study. And having said that, I would like to go to the results of this year. So what countries are most admired, has the best reputation? Well, this is what we have got in this year, 2025. Well, in our analysis, we use a normative scale with an average of 50 points. A score above 65 is considered excellent, between 55 and 65 strong, between 45 and 55 moderate, between 35 and 45 weak, and below 35 is poor. You see that with our color scale from red to dark green. In 2025, no country reaches the excellent level, but 5 come very close. Switzerland, Canada, Norway, Sweden, and Finland, the 5 of them have a very strong reputation. The difference between the first and the fifth is less than 1 point. This is, well, statistically significant given the sample that we have, but still small. Canada and Switzerland are tied in the first place, both recording a rep score of 60. So we can say that those are the most admired countries. Russia, Iran, and Iraq remain at the bottom of the table. Well, since the invasion of Ukraine, Russia ranks last in the reputation ranking, both in the previous years and today. The country with the best reputation in North America is Canada, in Latin America is Peru, in Europe, Switzerland, in Africa, Morocco, in Asia, Japan, and in Oceania, New Zealand. All countries with a strong reputation perform very well across all the dimensions. This is very relevant because when we analyze the different reputations of the countries, we can always see that we do not have any strong reputation that is weak in one of the 5 dimensions. What has happened in the last year? Well, the country with the sharpest decline, and probably what I would consider the news of the day, is the United States. United States, as you see here, drops 6.7 points in its rep score, and with that, it's falling 18 positions from the 30th that it had in 2024 to the 48th now. And this drop, places the United States in the weak tier of the RepCore normative scale. We have this from red to dark green, so it would be in the orange side. The decline is driven probably by controversial decisions from the new administration, but especially pronounced in traditional countries that were allies of the United States, such as the United Kingdom and Canada, where the US reputation has fallen the most. The only country where the reputation of the US, from the ones where we have analyzed it, has improved is Russia. The attributes most affected in the US reputation, the attributes where it has fallen the most, were commitment to the international community, fight against climate change, favorable business environment, and respected leaders. So, this is the story probably of the largest change in our ranking from previous year. South Korea also shows a notable decline. 1.8 points is the second country that falls the most, quite far away from the drop of the United States. This is probably linked to its recent institutional crisis. Well, the countries with the biggest improvements this year are Russia, Saudi Arabia, Mexico, China, Algeria, Japan, and Ukraine. Well, Russia and China are still among the lowest rated, and their improvements do not make it to change positions in the ranking. Ukraine and Algeria rise 5 positions each. Japan climbs 4 from the 12th to the 8th. So Japan is now among the top 10 in our ranking, and Saudi Arabia and Mexico both move up 2 positions in the ranking. This is basically the news about the emotional indicator, but let's go a little bit deeper in our analysis. Well, we have here our two the two people that are our two guest speakers, and we see that we have very good news for both, because Ukraine has grown 5 positions in the ranking with 1.9 increase, and Canada 2 positions in the ranking with 0.6 increase. Well, if we compare reputation and familiarity, being a well-known country means to have a good reputation? No. Being well-known, be powerful, does not guarantee a good reputation. If we see, for example, Russia has a lot of familiarity but a poor reputation, while, for example, Singapore has a very small familiarity, is not well-known, but the people that know Singapore evaluate Singapore very positively. So there is not a correlation between familiarity and reputation. Over here, we have also our guest speakers that you see both are above the average in terms of reputation. Canada scoring very high, as we see, is the country with the best reputation in the world, also very well known, tied with Switzerland. Well, what are the expectations? How can we manage this? We say that reputation is important. We understand reputation is about feelings, reputation has an impact in business. So what are the elements that make people admire, trust a country? Well, first of all, the first thing that we have done was to analyze public concerns, understanding a little bit the social context. We presented respondents with a materiality grid, including 34 issues, to identify which ones concern them most. And although the results may vary by country, grouping the G7, we can prioritize, and the high cost of living is clearly, it stands out above other concerns, but other topics also appear frequently, such as high taxes, immigration, climate change, healthcare coverage, corruptions, job quality, unemployment. In this context, what does international public opinion expect from countries? Which aspects are more important to generate admiration, respect, and trust? Well, we have gone to our model. We have done the analysis explaining RepScore, admiration, trust, and respect, with all the 22 variables that we have. And the first thing that we can see here is that the analysis confirms that ethical and environmental factors are becoming increasingly important for building a strong reputation. If we see here the 5 dimensions, the most important dimension for global public opinion is ethics and responsibility. And you know, this, if you go to the detail on the right, you have all the different specific single attributes, aspects of that reputation. By colors, you have in which dimension is every attribute. You can see that the 4 most important attributes that respond to the expectations of the general populations right now are coming from these ethics and responsibility dimensions, like fight against climate change is number 1, protection of the environment, number 2, ethics, transparency, absence of corruptions is number 3, and respect for human rights is number 4. So we can say that basically the ESG elements that are so important for companies are still very important for countries. We see that the dimension of ethics and responsibility accounts for 26.2% in reputation. It even has grown a little bit in percentage in the previous year. Its level of development that has gone down 1 point in importance from 2024. Well, are expectations universal? Well, the reality is that they are not. If we see, for example, if we see what happens, these expectations that I was explaining for G7, fights against climate change is number 1. In the case of China, it's number 3. In the case of Russia, it's not even in the top 10. If we have a look to what's important, for example, right now for Chinese people in order to admire a country, well-known brands and companies is more important than the quality of products and services. While in Russia, safety is what makes Russians admire more other countries. So we have to adapt when we do our analysis and our promotion campaigns to what are the expectations of the different people that may not be exactly the same. Well, how does a country reputation create tangible value? Let's go one step forward. Let's start by, for example, the impact on intention to visit. If we got in this quadrant analysis, the intention to visit in one side and the reputation in the vertical axis, you see that we get a straight line. What does it mean? It means that whenever the reputation of a country is higher, the intention to visit that country goes in the same direction. There is a high correlation. Well, there is only one exception, which is Ukraine. And well, this is happening, is understandable because of the situation the country is. The reputation of Ukraine is much higher than the intention to visit Ukraine because the situation of the war. If we do the same with, for example, the intention to invest in the country, we have the same straight line. In the case of Ukraine, they have the same problem, but not as relevant as with intention to visit. It's again, the reputation of the country is higher than the intention to invest, but the gap is not that high. So let's move forward. How can we calculate the impact? Well, we have done the following thing. We have taken 4 years of data from public sources, the World Tourism Organization, the United Nations Trade and Development, for tourist arrivals in value and for foreign direct investment. And we have arrived to the conclusion with our statistical analysis that 1 point increase in reputation in our rep score coming from our RepCore Nations leads to 7.2% increase in tourist arrivals in $1 million value. This is very interesting. Last year, we arrived to a smaller figure than that. And with 1 more year of data coming out of the pandemic years that were bad for doing this analysis, we can see that reputation drives clearly the intention to visit and then the real value in tourist arrivals. In terms of foreign direct investment, we have to say that this is a study in which we are analyzing perceptions of general public, not specifically investors. And even so, with this data, we can say that we can track that the 1 point increase in the reputation score leads to 1% in terms of $1 million value in foreign direct investment. So, well, quite interesting and a clear reason to invest in country branding. And well, in order to, after having given you the highlights of this year's study, I just want to give some little insights into Canada and Ukraine in order to help the debate we are going to have right now. Well, first of all, what is under that strong reputation that Canada has? Well, we have over here the 22 attributes that we have analyzed in our RepCore model. And what we have done is taking the average of the 60 countries with the largest GDP and see what is the difference between Canada and this average. We see that all 22 attributes are strengths for Canada. They are over 10 points ahead of the average in all attributes. But if we see what are the ones that mostly characterize the reputation of Canada: safety, respect for human rights, ethical, transparent, absence of corruption, protection of the environment. Those are the attributes where Canada is very strong. It's strong in everything, but that makes the difference. And that difference leads to support. So let's go to supportive behaviors. We say that the rep score of Canada is 13 points ahead of the average, 13.6 ahead of the average of the 60 countries with the largest GDP. If we analyze the different supportive behavior we're analyzing, I would invest in the country, would visit the country, would buy products or services, recommend living, recommend studying, working. We see that we have huge gaps, huge differences in favor of Canada in terms of the support from public. What is the one, the single supportive behavior in which Canada has a higher difference with the average of the GDP 60? Recommend living. So we have done a slight and additional analysis, understanding what makes a specific supportive behavior, what specific attributes can move that supportive behavior. We do it by analyzing the people that score, let's say, average, neutral evaluations. How can they move that neutral evaluation to a positive one? And number one attribute to move a positive evaluation in I would recommend living in the country is safety. Number two is attractive lifestyle. And number three is friendly people. So if we work on those three attributes, three messaging attributes, we would be able to grow the recommendation for living. Well, if we go back and we see that safety was number one difference for Canada, then we see it's the key attribute for recommending living. So it's no there's no doubt why Canada is so strong here. Well, let's give some other insights about Ukraine. Well, in this chart, this is a quadrant chart in which we have basically the same information we were presenting for Canada. That is the difference between Ukraine and the average of the 60 countries with the highest GDP in all the different variables, on all the different attributes, but we have crossed it with the importance of those attributes, with the relevance, the weights. So the attributes that are on the top are the attributes that are more important, on the bottom that have less importance in order to build reputation. What we can see is most of the attributes, rational attributes for Ukraine, are on the left, means that Ukraine doesn't arrive to the average of the GDP 60. There are only two attributes that are strengths, which are respect for human rights and respected leaders. Zelensky, etc. So Ukraine has two strengths and then has a strong weakness in safety in the current situation. But if Ukraine has more attributes that do not reach that average, why Ukraine has a reputation that is above average? And the reason is what we call the emotional halo. There are elements of reputation. I told you that reputation is about sentiment, it's about feelings. So when we measure reputation, we measure admiration, trust, and respect. If we take all the countries and we analyze and we compare the weighted average of the rational variables with the emotional indicator, reputation itself, mostly are basically the same, but there are some countries where there is a gap. That gap, when it is what we call emotional halo, that can be positive or negative. Those are the 10 most positive emotional halos in our study this year. And you have also the top 10 negative emotional halos, means a better rational evaluation than emotional. Ukraine has by far the highest emotional evaluation, means in compared with the rational, means that there is, let's say, a bonus of feelings of trust and admiration and respect to the country that comes from emotions and not from the rational variables. You see that after Ukraine, you have Greece, Egypt, Philippines, Peru, Thailand that have also positive emotional halos, while Russia is the most negative emotional halo, followed by China, the US, Germany, Saudi Arabia, Israel. So you see the difference, rational versus emotional. And what happens with Ukraine? The supportive behaviors, this is the evolution, the change between 2024 and 2025 of the supportive behaviors towards Ukraine. Ukraine increased 1.9 in the reputation score, only half a point in the rational index, in the weighted average of the rational variables, but the supportive behaviors look much more like the increase in emotions than the increase in the rational variable. That means that this growth in admiration, trust, and respect has a push to recommend investing in the country, which is a growth of 4.3 points, which is relevant. Recommend organizing or attending an event, recommend buying products. You see that there has been an increase in support towards Ukraine. And well, that's it for today. I'm going to just give you some takeaways, and I'm sure that it's going to be more interesting to hear from them. Well, basically, like companies, countries have a reputation that can be measured and should be managed. A country reputation is a set of feelings. Remember about the feelings generated through direct experience, communication, and third parties stereotypes. A country's reputation has an impact on its economy. I just want to remember average impact: 1 point in reputation, 7.2% in tourist arrivals, and 1% in foreign direct investment. Although reputation is an emotional concept, it is explained through rational drivers related to cultural, economic, political, social aspects. Among these rational levels, ethics and responsibility is the most important nowadays, is the one that aligns with the expectations of general public. Switzerland and Canada are the nations most admired by residents of the most developed countries in a year marked by the collapse of the United States reputation. And finally, the increase in admiration and respect for Ukraine has boosted international support. Well, thank you very much. I leave you with Claire and with Maria and Sarah to comment. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Fernando. I'm imagining applause rippling around the world. Thank you very much for sharing that with us. If I can invite Sarah and Maria to put their cameras back on and join us in the room, fantastic. Hello, hello, hello. So let's come to you first, Maria, if I may. You must be pleased to hear about that continued emotional halo effect for Ukraine's reputation. It must be important because you're continuing to ask for support in defending Ukraine against Russia's aggression. And over the past 3 years at City Nation Place, we've been really delighted to recognise the really creative and impactful approaches that Brand Ukraine has taken to build that emotional support. So how useful is this research to you in informing your continued strategy? How are you going to plan to continue to build the nation's brand reputation?
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much, Fernando and Claire, for this timely and important conversation. And I'm really excited about Ukraine's results. It means that we are doing the right thing, and it's always encouraging and rewarding to see the progress of Ukraine in such reputable ratings. It's always a bit challenging for me to use Ukraine's case as an example, or when we talk either at City Nation Place audiences or globally, because Ukraine's case in one way is unique, but I think what's can be illustrative or relevant for other countries and other places is why that reputation endures. And I think the most important lesson, which I've already shared with you at City Nation Place back in November and in other locations and occasions, is that in the times of crisis, and I think we all agree that the world is going through turbulent times and phase nowadays, what remains is a foundation. And how that foundation of either place or country is built is decides a lot of things when the stakes are high. And for us in Ukraine, that foundation has always been about values, about what we truly believe in and what we stand for, what we fight for, being freedom, dignity, resilience, hope, etc. And I believe that's why Ukraine's story still matters to people far from the front line, and the data and the research which Fernando has kindly shared with us proves it once more time. And I believe it's not because of perfect campaigns or perfect messaging. Also, I hope we do that. But I think it's because what we stand for as a country, for many people around the world, hold dear, and they truly believe, and that's something that resonates on a much deeper level than just communication or just messaging. And I think it's also important to say that this foundation, which I am referring to, it's not only communication-led or is about communication, it's also about actions. And it's about actions of both of country leaders or place leaders and fellow citizens. And just a very recent example, which you've probably followed or seen, is a dialogue, if I may say so, in the Oval Cabinet between our president and the president of the United States. And that situation, it was not, for me personally, and I think for many people around the globe, it wasn't like a diplomatic moment. It was quite I don't like this word, but transactional moments when the expectations were quite clear. What can Ukraine offer in return for American support? And for a leader of a country at war with limited resources of our own, I would say it was probably extremely difficult or tempting to compromise, but our president didn't. And I think what's really happened there what the whole world saw, that our president not only stood by Ukraine's interests, but he stood by these core values that Ukrainian people are fighting for, being dignity, freedom, will to choose our own future and our own paths. And I think the message which was sent back then is even when you have no cards left to play, so to say, your values still carry weight and they can still speak. And I think, Fernando, please correct me if I'm wrong, but the field work you were doing was just happened weeks after this episode. And I believe it had that emotional response in the hearts and minds of people all over the world. And I know that in today's world, that might sound idealistic, just talking about values as a foundation, but I'd argue that it's actually the most realistic thing we can hold on, because ultimately, what a country stands for, what it can fight for. And reputation in our reality, I'd say, is no longer just about economic value, which Fernando, you referred to, attracting investors, tourists, or global talents. It's also about, and it also becomes a national security instrument. And I think this is a very important angle which place leaders or country leaders should take into account, because again, the times we live in are quite challenges. And I'd say it's also a quite strong argument, because in Ukraine's case, our positive reputation quite literally translates into global support that literally helps us defend what we stand for and what we fight for. And that's why the conversations like the one we are having today are so valuable, because it reminds us that we live in the world where like global attention is always shifting, fading, and that's what we see happens with Ukraine. We don't have any more that proactive attention from global media or communities, but what it shows that world still cares about values we stand for and we fight for, and the research and the data which Fernando has shown proves that. And one last point from my side, and I'll be happy to continue the discussion with you and answer possibly questions, that it's also important for us in Ukraine not only to rely on emotional support, but we also look into rational variables, because we also plan for post-victory. We plan for rebuilding, reopening, reimagining Ukraine, hopefully welcoming students, visitors, global talents, investors, holding conferences or global events. And I can't even say how much I look forward to coming back to those activities, but we look at the rational attributes, we do our homework, we try to be relevant and offer solutions and contribute to global well-being, even despite our own challenges. And again, thank you so much for this inspiring results for Ukraine. I'll be happy to share with everyone in Ukraine, and look forward to continuing the discussion.
Thank you, Maria. And you raised some very important issues there, and I don't want to sort of cheapen anything you've said by sounding like I'm doing a commercial pitch. We had our advisory group meeting yesterday. We gather places from around the world, just a small group, so that we can keep up with what people's challenges are. And we had quite a robust conversation about values, and on values in relation to soft power versus hard power. And I guess transactional power is another way of describing hard power. And that is something that we will be talking about again at the global conference this year. But I'd like to come, and if anyone does have any questions for Maria, please put them in the Q&A. I can see some questions beginning to come through. But before I address those, I'd like to come to you, Sarah, as well. I've just come back from Canada, so I can very much attest to your beautiful natural landscapes, the friendliness of your people. And I know that Destination Canada is a very data-led organisation. So I'd love to understand how this study will add to your understanding of the global brand of Canada, how you're going to leverage your understanding of the country's international reputation in your development of the destination brand and that more targeted marketing approach.
Yeah, thanks, Claire, and thanks, Fernando. The research is it's incredibly deep, and we're going to want to dive in much deeper into it and understand how we can connect the dots back to our brand and our work. As many might not know, Destination Canada is a National Tourism Board of Canada. We're a federally funded crown corporation. And our job is to market Canada in international markets. We also support our tourism sector with information and data and collective intelligence. And we also work in a destination management space as well, supporting our partners and building out that tourism economy through product that can be put onto the world stage. So there's a lot to be done, especially when it comes to the reputation of a brand. And Destination Canada plays a huge role in, marketing Canada as a friendly, open, and welcoming nation for tourists to visit. And we love this research because, reputation. We're true believers in the fact that reputation of a brand really does incite people to buy, use, or travel to that country. And Canada's having a bit of a moment right now. As I said, we're consistently viewed as this very friendly nation. And I love to dig into, how friendly your stakeholders thought Canada was. But from a tourism perspective, the numbers are definitely reinforcing this. We've got very strong traveler sentiment and forward bookings. Our summer is getting up to capacity across Canada. But I just want to lean into how important data is to us making decisions about our brand. In this the RepCore study, it reinforces that the value of tourism is important. And we have a data collective where we hold is a centralized, secure place. It's AI-driven intelligence platform for the Canadian tourism industry, and we house about 25 billion data points spanning 5,000 communities. So it's like anything from consumer data to arrivals and forecast data to segmentation to our wealth and well-being index. But there was a really salient data point that came out of the data collective, and that was that 65% of our target guests, we refer to them as our highly engaged guests, are more likely to travel than any other traveler and seek out destinations that feel unique and authentic. And I think that plays very well into having a strong reputation. You can't be fake, and you can't be, having sort of filtered content, fake content. You have to be real, particularly today in a world we're living in a world of disruption and unpredictability, and so your brand is very important. It has to ride through all of these different shifts and changes that we experience. So we recently launched a new consumer brand and tagline called Canada Naturally. You can see it on our website at destinationcanada.com. But essentially, it's designed to reflect what naturally comes to Canada, and that and comes to the minds of travelers. Like when they think of us, they think of our incredible awe-inspiring landscapes and our warm-hearted people. And we're bringing that Canada Naturally campaign to life in our key markets, through some wonderful, beautiful advertising. But we're also using street view imagery. We're not tapping into AI. We're not using AI influencers. We're not using AI developed content. We really want to lean into what's real. But we need to know, is the brand actually making an impact as we put that marketing into place? Is it driving a long-term return for Canada? And so at the end of the day, what we're trying to really understand and measure from our brand is, are we having an economic impact on revenue, jobs, wages for Canada? And is it actually impacting the wealth and well-being of the residents of Canada? And I love the point that Fernando made around, if you have 1 point of increase in your country's reputation, it drives an average impact of 7.2% in tourist arrivals and 1% in foreign direct investment. And that is a huge thing for us to measure as a tourism brand, because we have to demonstrate value. Last year, we demonstrated that for every dollar we spent, we drove $24 in economic impact for Canada. which was to the tune of about $3.2 billion. But you need tools to help you understand how your brand is performing. And so we recently added some new brand measurement tools into our data collective that both Destination Canada and our Team Canada partners share and help us make decisions about how our brands are performing when we put them into the marketplace. So we've been using a tool called Bera.ai. It's based out of the US. They track over 2,000 brands. And so we are able to watch weekly how our brand is performing against four very important measures that have been statistically proven to drive business outcomes like revenue. So familiarity, that was in the RepCore study. How familiar are consumers with your brand? And it ranks them anywhere from they don't know your brand all the way to this is a household name. Regard, which is how much they regard your brand, positive or negative. Meaningfulness, which is that emotional connection with the brand, but do they see themselves using your brand? And finally, how distinct is your brand? How unique is your brand? And that rolls up into what we call a brand love index. And we're able to see how we rank against not just other travel brands, but other brands in the space that hold the hearts and minds of and wallets of consumers and travelers. And so why is that important again? Is because at the end of the day, we have to demonstrate value for every dollar we spend and invest in market against what we drive for Canadians and what we drive for the residents of Canada, which is revenue, which is jobs, and ultimately what goes back into the communities from a wealth and well-being perspective. So all extremely important. And thank you again for this research and for the fact that Canada came in tied for first place with Switzerland, which is brilliant.
Yes, congratulations, Sarah. Actually, there's a question that's just come in immediately, so I'm just going to come straight back to you on it, if I may. Did you say that for every dollar spent, you saw 24 times the economic impact?
Correct. Yeah. There's a value of tourism report on our website, and it goes into detail about it. It's 2023 that this came out. We're still calculating our 2024 results, but it was, for every dollar we spent, we drove $24 almost. It's like $23.84 in economic impact for Canada.
Thank you. Well, the questions are flying in now. I have my own. I'm not going to get around to asking them. There are two questions which are quite related. And actually saying, what does all this mean for cities? What role does city branding play within that broader context of nation branding? So there are some countries which may be less well known, Fernando, on that familiarity or knowability score, but the cities might be better known. So, I mean, do you see a correlation? Do you consider cities as well? Is that something you're planning to do?
Well, yes. In the past, we've done it. I would talk like when we work for companies about brand architecture. At the end, the country brand would be the master brand, and you have the different cities or regions or states. At the end, they contribute, and sometimes in my experience, I've noticed that the reputation levels of the cities were several times stronger even than the reputations of the countries where those cities were. So I think it's an asset. It's a completely different kind of analysis because you have to take on account different variables in order to analyze. But at the end, admiration, trust, and respect work exactly the same for a city, for a region, or for a country, or for a company, or even for a leader. We do reputation of leaders as well. It's a question of the variables that you use to explain and the plans. And at the end, the coordination is very relevant because it's like when you are handling a corporate brand and you have product brands, they have to be linked and there is endorsement.
Mhm. And there is a very technical question which just says, can you just give a little bit more information on the methodology for recruiting participants?
Recruiting. Okay. Well, we
And
have
basically
used,
any screening to qualify or disqualify some of the participants in the survey.
okay. Well, we used a panel, an international panel to do this kind of research. It's online research. For this study, we have used Toluna. This is our research partner, and we have we basically we are setting quotas in order to have representativity of the general population of the different markets in terms of age and gender. So at the end, we cover certain let's say a global sample in which we try basically to represent general population. There is not there is something very important. I have someone telling me here. We do have Sarah spoke about familiarity. We have a familiarity filter. If when we analyze, I've shown a table comparing reputation and familiarity. We have a familiarity filter because if you don't know anything about the country, you cannot discuss about if it has success in sports or if it has products with very good quality. So we have that scale that Sarah was mentioning. In our case, it's a scale from 1 to 7, and in 1, 2, and 3 are let's say discarded, filter out because of I don't know, I had heard the name. Those people are filtered out. So at the end, if we want to describe the universe of the data we have, is people that are connected to the internet, general population, 18 and older, that have certain level of knowledge about that country.
Okay, I thought it was really interesting when you looked at what the populations of the different countries, ranked as highest in terms of what they wanted to see from a country. That I thought was particularly interesting. I'd like to come to all three of you again about this emotional, rational reputation, and ask you to step out of your current roles, if you like, Sarah and Maria, as well, because we've talked about the overall brand in terms of Ukraine, and Maria, you mentioned, obviously the emotional halo is supremely important, but you're also trying to focus on those rational arguments as well. And Sarah, you've been very much focused on how you translate the reputation of Canada to your very successful destination marketing. But in terms of investment attraction, I think that if you look back at investment attraction promotion, 10 years ago, it would all have been on the rational arguments, and therefore became quite samey between countries, I would say, between cities. They will talk about tax incentives, infrastructure, geographical advantages, etc. Do you believe, let me start with you, Maria, because you started to reference it, that the value of emotional reputation is having a much greater impact on investment attraction strategy?
That's a good question. Thank you, Claire. I think both are equally important because, like you've seen Ukraine's results. If not for that emotional support, I guess we wouldn't enjoy such a global support and solidarity, and built-in emotional connections and emotional brands is as important as rational. But again, you've seen, I think, Fernando, we've just talked in March about Ukraine's last year result. It's not as stable and predictable, emotional as rational ones. So I would, like, inside the team, we look at rational drivers, and even nowadays also we're not engaged like in classic like tourism promotion. For example, I was pleased to see investment rank quite highly because one of the areas where Ukraine is actively engaging investment is defense tech, for example. Also, there are so many like barriers to that and security risks. Still, we do look for investors. We still export abroad, so we need to build those, and we do look into this rational attributes. So I don't know if I answered your question, but I think both are equally important depending on the country.
Balance, yeah. No, perfect. Thank you very much. And Sarah, how are your colleagues who are working on investment and trade for Canada reflecting on reputation?
Well, I think we pull it right back to, as you said, that emotional component of a brand. I think it was, gosh, what, 5 years ago, and we spent some time with Kevin Roberts, who was the former CEO of Saatchi and Saatchi, and he wrote a book about the most loved brands, and we had this long-term goal to be a love brand. It's like the rational side of the brain gets thrown out, but the heart takes over, right? And I think that's the big part of what we continuously do with our brand and our marketing is how do we reach into the hearts and minds of our travelers? And so number one, you got to understand what makes them tick. You've got to understand what product they're leaning into from a travel perspective and an experience perspective. But it has to be grounded in what's real and what's true about Canada and Canadians. So, I think that's where we are leaning in. And we've been using BERA, this brand equity tool, which has some incredible components to it, creative testing, which enables you to start to lean into the emotional attributes of your brand. Where do you stand out in comparison to your competitors? And how do you lean into those attributes in your marketing and in your branding in order to drive that reputation and that desire to purchase and use your brand? And then you start to see that come through in those 4 metrics that I talked about, which is familiarity, regard, meaning, and uniqueness. Meaning and uniqueness are heavily tied to human emotion. And if you can lean in there and drive meaning and uniqueness for your brand, it will ultimately drive familiarity and a long-term regard, which is reputation for your brand, which then makes people want to buy it and purchase it. So hopefully that answered your question, Claire. But
yeah, no, it does. And it chimes very much, as I said, in yesterday's advisory group, we were talking about values and basically saying that if you don't focus on the values, then you have a product. If you're thinking of a brand, you need to have values behind it. We are technically out of time, but I'm going to throw you one quick question, Fernando. See if I can get you to a quick yes or no. Somebody has said that it's interesting that you focus on the top world economies. If you were to consider countries with lower GDP, might different countries come out on top as reputation leaders? I'm wondering if maybe this focus on different countries could help explain the growing polarization in the world.
Well, we have measured other countries that are not in this ranking because the study is wider. And to tell you the truth, we do not see in smaller GDP. Well, could happen in smaller countries in first world that have a stronger reputation. Over there are a lot of small countries that have a pretty good reputation. But the thing is that in my experience, probably it's going to be difficult that we find a country with a better reputation than Canada in this study. And I cannot be more in agreement with Sarah about final impact in economic impact. And this is positive or negative. I just want to mention, if you don't mind, the elephant in the room. I mentioned the fall in reputation of the US, but I haven't mentioned the fall in intention to buy products or intention to visit the country. It's huge, the decrease in this 2025 year in those supportive behaviors towards the US. That has already been, if you take the data on tourist arrivals, etc., probably you will already see the decrease. So, at the end, emotions drive behavior.
Thank you. Yes, I mean, that leads to a whole other conversation about if you're a place brander, what you do when your government goes rogue on policy and has a negative impact on your brand. Do you go quiet? Do you communicate on other stuff? There's a whole conversation. Sadly, we are out of time. I would like to thank you very much, Fernando, for sharing the data with us. Thank you, Sarah and Maria, for joining us and sharing your own response to that and a little bit of insight into your strategies. It's very much appreciated. And thank you, everybody who tuned in to listen. The session has been recorded, so feel free to return if you want to check up on some of the things Fernando or Sarah or Maria were saying, or if you want to share it with your colleagues. But for now, I'm going to say over and out. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.